We'll go straight to the star of the video, UKIP Scottish MEP David Coburn in action.
Let me begin by asking you, when you put things into the public domain, do you research them or do you make them up?
Well, there's a challenging question. So he's been asked, when you put out facts and figures, do you make them up or do you actually check that they're true and present genuine facts? Now, in my opinion, I think the correct answer to that question is we would never make things up. We research them properly. Let's see how David Coburn handled it.
Do you research them or do you make them up?
A little bit of both.
Well, we've got some more magic moments with David Coburn later in the video. In this video, I'm going to talk about my experience in UKIP. I was a member of UKIP, I was a candidate, but subsequently left. I never really got around to telling the whole story. So here it is. When I've been involved in public speaking, writing, debating for a while, a lot of people were saying to me, I think you should go into politics. And I realised that out of all the things I was speaking about, debating about, writing about, it was the political side that I was being drawn to the most. So I decided I would enter politics. So you need to choose a party. I thought maybe the Conservatives, generally my personal views would be sort of right of centre, probably. So I thought the Conservatives maybe would be a natural home. Then I looked at the 2010 election and there was a candidate called Philip Lardner in Arran. And he made a comment about homosexuality that came to light during the election campaign. The comment wasn't outrageous. It wasn't maybe the wording I'd have used, but it wasn't outrageous. But David Cameron just chopped him immediately. He was deselected as Conservative candidate. Then I looked at the party in Scotland as well, looking at it with Ruth Davidson, extremely liberal. And I thought, I'm not going to survive in the Conservative Party. I could join, spend 2 years getting to know everyone, delivering leaflets, applying to be a candidate, but I'm just really charging at a brick wall. I'm not going to make it through. There's going to be some controversy because of things I'm on the record saying, socially conservative things, and that's going to mean I'm going to get the chop. So the Conservatives were out. So which party could it be? UKIP. I mean, I actually wanted to leave the EU. It wasn't top of my political agenda by a long way, but I was on that side of the debate. I realised that UKIP wasn't a socially conservative party. They're not pro-marriage, they're not pro-life. I realised that, but I thought at least it's somewhere where I'd be able to survive, maybe even be welcome. So there would be the possibility of having some influence, having a voice to speak out on the issues that I think are really important. So I joined UKIP. Here's the proof. Got my rosette. So I joined UKIP, got to know people, particularly in the Edinburgh branch. UKIP's quite small in Scotland. I got to know lots of interesting people, some really good, decent, reasonable people, some good friends still. Some are unusual views from some people. When we talk about foreign policy, the use of nuclear weapons seemed to crop up more often than it did when talking to other people. Even sometimes with domestic policy, nuclear weapons were recommended as a solution to various problems, which I thought was a little extreme, one might say. But anyway, in 2013, I went along to the UKIP conference that was in Edinburgh down at the Corn Exchange, and someone had come up from London, David Coburn, to give a speech. His speech was only about 2 or 3 minutes long. No one really knew who he was and why he was there, but he'd obviously been positioned, lined up to become the European candidate, to become the MEP for Scotland. And he gave a speech which I thought was unintelligent, simplistic, bombastic, just nonsense. I thought it came across terribly. Then another speech on the day was by a chap called Misty Thackeray. And I listened to him speaking, and I just thought he seems a complete thug. Now I thought I should give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's just from a background different from my own. I'm not used to meeting people like that. So I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, but we'll see how that worked out. There's one chap who was the chairman in Scotland, seemed a decent fellow, Mike Scott Hayward. I quite liked him, but he disappeared soon enough when David Coburn came on the scene. So David Coburn ended up being selected to be the top candidate on the UKIP list for the European elections, and he got elected as an MEP. Now, people think that was rigged in some way from the party centrally. David Coburn was from London. He had no real connections with the party in Scotland. Some people suggest that the electoral process might not have been entirely transparent and fair. I'm not sure. But before you know it, his right-hand man was this Misty Thackeray as well. And he collected around himself an inner circle that included some pretty unsavoury characters. MEPs have a huge staff budget, so he had quite a few employees around him. Now, David Coburn and Misty Thackeray in particular, their general conversation could be pretty vulgar, sexual, sort of unpleasant. Misty would brag about his violent past, and there'd always be rumours swirling around of various unsavoury or possibly illegal goings-on around them. Misty, in a meeting, I heard him once say that he'd known Nick Griffin for 30 years. Nick Griffin, the leader of the British National Party. Now, if you've been a member of the BNP, you're not allowed to actually join UKIP. And there have been various stories in the media of Misty having connections with the far right, which he always denied. But he said that openly in a meeting. When challenged about it later, he wouldn't admit that he'd said it. I mean, Misty's on the record as saying that Catholicism is a form of fascism. So these are the two people at the top of the party. Now, if you're joining a party and, you quite fancy the idea of being a candidate, possibly even getting elected at some point, you want to get to know the people at the top. You want to have a chat with them and join in the conversation and get to know them. But with that pair, I just couldn't join in the conversation. It was so smutty and vulgar and unpleasant. It wasn't a conversation I could take part in. One of the first times I met Misty, personally, he was holding court with a group of members and activists around him, telling a story about a recent hustings before the EU election in 2014. And David Coburn was taking part along with Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, who was the candidate for the SNP at that stage. And Misty explained how David and he had come up with this plan that they called Operation Trashmina. And the plan was to mispronounce her name in as many ways as they could during the proceedings to really wind her up, so it was Jasmina, Pashmina, you name it. And Misty told the story that eventually Tasmina sort of broke down in tears and collapsed on the desk and could hardly carry on. She was so upset. Misty said that he was shouting out mispronunciations from the back and David Coburn was doing it from the front. There's just a couple of clips from the video of it here. Incidentally, there is no sign of Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh collapsing as a result of it. But here's a little bit of what went on, and eventually a member of the audience objected to it.
And Jasmine, I'm sure everybody else, they're all...
Tasmina.
Oh, Tasmina, sorry. Lovely.
And could I just make a point today that it's extremely bad manners to continuously carry on calling a panel member by the incorrect name.
I didn't.
No, you've done it several times.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ignorant. I think you should be apologising to the candidate there and everybody else here.
Wow. Sorry. This gentleman got my name wrong. It happens. I'm sure. I don't mean it.
Oh no, you do mean it, and it's ignorant. So please don't.
Should ask her. Read my mind.
Well, I thought that was pretty unpleasant, a bit nasty. But the main thing is just infantile. And I'm sorry to say, I voted for David Coburn in that election. So the moral of the story is, know the candidate before you vote. Anyway, moving on. When I got involved with the Edinburgh branch a little bit, the chairman asked me if I'd like to give a speech to the Edinburgh branch, and I did that one evening, and I gave a speech on freedom of speech. I talked about various issues where freedom of speech is under attack on university campuses, various other contexts in employment. I talked about lots of different issues, areas where freedom of speech is under attack. I spoke about how Stonewall had tried to get me fired when I objected to the Bigot of the Year campaign, etc., etc. At several points during my talk, I said you might agree or disagree with the various viewpoints that are causing the controversy, but my point here is freedom of speech. And at the end of it, David Coburn wasn't there, but David Coburn's gay partner was there, and he went hysterical, saying that I was being anti-gay and it ridiculous, because I talked about the way some opponents of same-sex marriage had been mistreated, for example. Some of David Coburn's cronies were there, and they also responded really negatively at the end of it. Now, part of the reason for that was that UKIP in Scotland was completely dysfunctional. The overall leadership were at war with the Edinburgh branch. There were all sorts of bitter divisions. But anyway, the upshot was that I gave us a talk about freedom of speech, and it ended up that David Coburn reported me to the UKIP HQ for making homophobic comments, which was completely ridiculous. The next I heard of it, there's somehow or other thrown in anti-Semitic as well. How they dreamt that up, I just cannot begin to imagine. Anyway, it came around to the 2015 election, and I applied to be a candidate, went through the selection process, passed all of that, that was fine. And then it came to allocating a seat. And at this point, all these complaints were with headquarters, and they were trying to stop me from standing. So I argued my case, and some people in the Edinburgh branch helped me. And I really said, no, this is nonsense. There's no reason why I shouldn't be standing. And eventually, pretty well at the last minute, they agreed. We got word from the top that yes, it was okay for me to be a candidate. Immediately that came through, David Coburn and his cronies tried to get someone else to go into the constituency where I was going to stand in Edinburgh South West. So they got someone that night to come in at the last minute and just take the constituency so I couldn't stand. It so happened that was a chap that I knew, good bloke, and he agreed to stand aside when he heard about the story, and so I eventually did get to stand. So after all that fighting and stubborn sticking to my guns and finally getting through it all, they granted me the honour of spending more than £1,000 of my own money to stand in a no-hoper constituency representing UKIP. And recently David Coburn's jumped on the Count Dankula issue and tried to present himself as a great defender of freedom of speech. Don't believe it. Now let's move on a little bit more about David Coburn and his leadership style.
Maybe it's that bossy attitude that's annoying people.
Oh, well, I'm not saying I'm bossy. I'm really chummy and friendly and gooey and fluffy and marshmallowish.
Now, David Coburn alienated activists in UKIP at an amazing rate. He would just pick a fight with anyone in any branch over anything in the way that he had with me. If you weren't part of his inner circle, you're an enemy. And alongside that was just his incompetence. His performances in the media were terrible, and he was also coming over as a disreputable character. There was an incident where he said Hamza Yousaf, he said he called him Abu Hamza, something again, terrible publicity, big scandal to do with that. He appeared in the Scottish Parliament one day and said that women are a special sort of man, and he explained it later on like this. He said, the long and short of it is that a woman is a man with a womb. I said, a woman is a special sort of man. They are. They are a man that can produce children. Anyway, we're going to watch quite a few little clips now of David Coburn in action in the heat of the election campaign battle. Watch this.
I hear that some are on 150,000 in Glasgow City Council. 5 of them or so. Did you just make that up?
No, that's where we found that, and it looks like it's a good piece of information. Have you found otherwise?
But you didn't make it up?
No, certainly not.
So when Glasgow City Council gave me a statement saying that only one officer earns over £150,000, they were making it up. You said, and I quote, this penny we are going to put in taxes will raise somewhere in the region of £800 million. Did you make that up?
No, I think it's somewhere between 500 and 800,000 pounds. It depends how you look at it. But 500,000 is probably more accurate. It's half of.
So it's somewhere between 800 million and 500,000.
500 million, sorry.
And the yield is not £800 million. It's nothing like £800 million. It's £475 million.
I did say £500 million, didn't I?
Yeah, but it's not £500 million either.
Well, it's a lot of money, Bernard.
You said last Thursday, 17,000 higher rate taxpayers in Scotland to contribute about 14% of the tax take. Did you make that up?
No, that was the figures we thought were right, and that's the figures we're given.
Where's the source? 15% of Scottish taxpayers are higher rate taxpayers. The figure is over 370,000. Not 17,000.
You have your figures, I've got my figures. We obviously must agree to differ.
Primaries 1, 2 and 3. What I'm asking for, what is the costing which attaches to that pledge? It's a pretty straightforward question.
Well, I can give you a pretty straightforward answer. I don't know that figure right now.
How many more teachers will you need to implement this policy?
Well, we'll need as many teachers as we require for the number of students.
So, and how much are you going to cut the Scottish Bloc by axing Barnett?
Oh, I see what you're trying to get at. Well, yeah, what we're going to do is 1.5% off each year until by year 1920, it's 5.5%.
No, it's 5.5 billion.
Billion, yeah.
So it's 1.5 billion this year.
Yes, per annum.
So you already have a needs-based formula, which according to this manifesto, which you've published today, will take £1.5 billion off the Scottish Bloc this year. UKIP's proposal for Scotland is that the amount of money which will be at the disposal of the Scottish Government will be £5.5 billion less.
Yes, and what will be happening is that it should be based
What's the current budget of the Scottish Parliament?
32 billion.
32 billion and a £5.5 billion cut. Where do you suggest that all of the candidates that will be fighting the Scottish Parliament elections next year find £5.5 billion out of a budget of 30 billion? Where do you suggest they find the money?
Quite simply. Well, let's start with the First Minister's just had a rise.
When I showed you those figures, you looked surprised that was the first time you'd seen them.
It's not so much surprise, it's lack of spectacle.
And the third thing that you're proposing is the primary purpose rule. Why are you bringing that back?
Well, I think that we want to know what people are coming here for. I think it's quite... We must be strict about who we're letting into the country, and we want to know the purpose why they're coming.
Why specifically the primary purpose rule?
Why not?
What is the primary purpose rule?
Well, the primary purpose for coming to the country. You want to know what they're coming here for.
Well, the primary purpose rule, which was abolished in 1997, which you are pledged to bringing back, what was it?
Well, basically, it's what is your primary purpose of coming to the UK? Are you coming here to work or not?
Well, that's not actually what it was.
Oh, enlighten me.
Well, the primary purpose rule, which was abolished in 1997, was specifically for British nationals who either marry or enter into a civil partnership with non-EU individuals.
One of the most amazing things in the 2015 election campaign was when UKIP Scotland held a manifesto launch event, and the media gathered, and they then explained to the media that they hadn't got the manifesto ready in time after all, and there was no manifesto to hand out. They claimed it was a problem with the printer, but if that was the case, surely it would have appeared in electronic form. I never saw a copy of the manifesto as a candidate. It was never circulated to the media. People think it maybe did exist after the launch date, but what audacity to hold a manifesto launch and then just not have a manifesto. And it was a laughingstock. It was reported in newspapers, etc. Anyway, then it came around to the 2016 election. We were really in despair. The EU election looming, Scottish elections looming. UKIP should have been in prime position to get MSPs elected. In the EU referendum, David Coburn will be a disaster representing the Leave campaign in Scotland. So it got to the point where 10 of us, 10 activists in Scotland, 5 branch chairs, I was the branch secretary at the time, and another 4 people as well, we wrote to Nigel Farage asking him to do something about David Coburn. So here's the letter that was sent to the National Executive Council of UKIP. I'll just read a few bits of it. The recent Survation poll, which predicted us winning 7 MSPs in the coming Holyrood elections, shows that in Scotland, just as much as in Wales, we have the opportunity to make a domestic breakthrough. With the EU referendum being on the 23rd of June, our strongest issue will be centre stage throughout the Holyrood campaign. The EU referendum campaign represents a major challenge, as UKIP is Scotland's only pro-Brexit party, and David Coburn is Scotland's foremost Leave politician. Without firm and speedy action from the NEC, Scotland could lose us the referendum. The launch of the non-existent Scottish Manifesto on the last Monday of the campaign, 3 days before voting, was a stunning example of recklessness and incompetence. At the launch, David and the regional chairman, Misty Thackeray, claimed that they did not have hard copies of the manifesto because of a problem with the printer relating to it being a bank holiday. 2 of David's employees subsequently contradicted that claim in front of several witnesses. One staffer stated that the Scottish Manifesto did not exist. Another stated that Misty had been typing away at the manifesto that weekend. Subsequently, at an Edinburgh branch meeting, David and Misty gave a different explanation for the non-appearance of the manifesto. Also, our candidates never received electronic copies of it. Unsurprisingly, their coverage of the launch was universally negative and disparaging. It's very fortunate the story was not picked up by television or national press. Misty has also been at the heart of a persistent culture of bullying in the Scottish region. Misty and his associates have on occasion attended branch meetings in force to intimidate the branch committee and have gone so far as to hijack meetings, conduct which has no place in the Democratic Party. Members have spoken have been uncomfortable in these meetings. The bullying conduct continues to cause keen activists to stand down as candidates and in some cases leave the party. Incidentally, we understand that there's currently a formal complaint against one close associate of the Scottish team. Right, on the 1st of February, the Sunday Mail's cover story was UKIP Scottish chairman steps down after facing 6 sex call charges. Realistically, the only way to protect the reputations of David and his party is for Misty to be neither seen nor heard until the case is resolved. He was actually found guilty of making sexual phone calls to people he didn't know, women he didn't know. Okay, what have we got next? In private, David Coburn can be charming, witty and excellent company. I didn't entirely agree with that. However, these private qualities can lead to major public gaps. For example, when speaking to a Daily Mail journalist in the spring of last year, David compared the Scottish Government Minister Humza Yousaf to the apologist for terrorists Abu Hamza. This off-the-cuff remark seriously damaged David's credibility and UKIP's image in Scotland and made it easy for our opponents to paint us as the party of racists. It did not help that we knew there was no ill intent or racism involved. Hustings audiences were entirely unwilling to accept any kind of defence or mitigation of David's insult of Humza Yousaf. The damage on the race issue was increased by press reports of Operation Trashmina. This was the allegation that during a debate in Glasgow, David had intentionally repeatedly misnamed the SNP MEP candidate Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh in order to undermine her. The truth or otherwise of this allegation is perhaps unimportant. What's important, however, is that over several months, Misty Thackeray repeatedly told this damaging story to many of our activists, including people who subsequently left the party without being silenced by either David or Kevin, who had both on occasion heard him telling the story. It was thus inevitable that it would come out. During last year's general election campaign, Jamie Ross of BuzzFeed wrote after interviewing David Coburn in Falkirk, calling the leader of the opposition, you can read that for yourself, will probably count as a scandal for most politicians, but for David Coburn, Scotland's only UKIP representative, it barely raised an eyebrow. David is not suited to being the Scottish face of the Brexit campaign. So the recommendations at the end of the letter: order tests to determine which lead list candidate is the most effective debater and television performer, appoint that person as Scottish spokesman until the conclusion of the referendum. Failure to act will seriously impair our Holyrood campaign and jeopardise the referendum. There's no answer to the letter. It was completely ignored by the UKIP hierarchy, and it got to the stage where activists in Scotland were getting so fed up with it that they started to leave, and eventually that letter went public. It went to the media, and that was the stage where I decided I was going to leave UKIP. I decided I'd had enough of David Coburn and his exploits. Dishonest, disreputable and incompetent, and no one was going to do anything about it. So it became a news story. I did some interviews on Radio Scotland, on the things in the Guardian and the Herald, on the TV news on a couple of stations, etc., talking about the issue. The thing that really got me is that when David Coburn and Misty Thackeray were challenged about the Trashmina business, they just completely denied it, barefaced lying in the media. I just can't work with those people. Here's just a sample of some of the media coverage that it got.
Good evening. A group of senior UK Independence Party activists are calling for their leader in Scotland, David Coburn, to be replaced. In a letter to party bosses seen by Reporting Scotland, the group warns that unless a new spokesman is appointed, their Holyrood election campaign will be damaged and the EU referendum could be lost. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
A united front in Edinburgh on the day UKIP published its Holyrood manifesto. But the smiles mask deep divisions inside this party.
At the end of February, 10 key activists in UKIP Scotland, including 5 local party chairmen, wrote to party bosses in London complaining about dysfunctional management of UKIP Scotland and calling for the leadership team to be cleared out. Without action, they said UKIP's Holyrood election campaign would be seriously impaired and its efforts in the EU referendum campaign would be jeopardised.
Waiting to grasp the opportunity to shake up Holyrood.
UKIP's regional organiser in Scotland is Kevin Newton. The letter says he's failed and should be replaced. UKIP Scotland's chairman, Arthur Misty Thackeray, stood down after being charged with making indecent phone calls. The letter says he should be neither seen nor heard until the court case is resolved.
If you want some trouble caused on your behalf, I'm the man that will do it.
Euro MP David Coburn is UKIP's leader in Scotland. The letter says he is not suited to being the Scottish face of the Brexit campaign and should be replaced as lead spokesperson.
Jobs is the thing we require.
And we won't do that.
Despite the criticism, David Coburn continues to make UKIP's case in Scotland. No action appears to have been taken by UK party bosses.
I've got every confidence in David. He's colourful, he's larger than life. He just occasionally says things that perhaps he might regret later.
Well, I thought the letter raised some pretty serious concerns, but the UKIP NEC didn't think it even merited a reply. I came to realise through this that UKIP runs on loyalty, not honesty, not decency, not merit, not ability. The only commodity of any value is loyalty. If you're one of Farage's men, he's behind you. If you're one of Coburn's men, he's behind you. If you're not, then you're the enemy. That's all that counts. Loyalty is the only commodity with any value. Right, by now, I hardly know anyone still in UKIP. I think there's not many people in it or activists beyond David Coburn and his paid staff. Misty was convicted of making indecent phone calls. David Coburn's basically destroyed UKIP in Scotland. Now, I used to think that UKIP was uniquely bad here in Scotland. People used to say that to me, put up with it here, it may be awful, but the party UK-wide is much better run. There are not the same sort of issues there. But having had a glimpse into UKIP's internal goings-on since then, that's not the case. You've seen in the news punch-ups, the endless leadership, elections, just a fiasco. And you've got to bear in mind that UKIP in London, they were the ranks through which David Coburn rose. Within 5 minutes of meeting him, I thought, this is not someone I would want representing me or my party. And yet in UKIP, in London, he rose to the top. I found it bizarre recently that David Coburn was a candidate for UKIP leadership. He's got a CV of utter disaster, and yet he had the brass neck to put himself forward as a leadership candidate. Anyway, one last little twist to my tale. Let's watch this.
It is untrue to, it's untrue to suggest that children are being indoctrinated in school.
Well, your party are doing their best.
Children are learning in schools. They're places of learning and freedom of thought.
David said brainwashing.
Are you a UKIP member or fan or voter? Or?
As it happens now, that's not the capacity I'm here today.
No, I know.
I wouldn't. Brainwashing is quite an emotive term, but it is a fact that in schools in Britain there are materials used produced by the EU. There are quizzes, activities, youth parliaments. Now, I think the purpose of those is to give people a positive impression of the EU. No, I'm not saying that.
It's just nonsense. I have to tell you this.
It's just to deny people access to information to make an informed decision.
Which fact that I stated that is incorrect? Which of those facts is incorrect?
In every school, there's a healthy debate about all aspects of life, because that's what's important for maturity. There's no brainwashing. There's no documents.
I didn't say indoctrination.
Rich is here to talk about heaven. Tell us about this particular hell that you're talking about.
European Union.
You're trying to
give us one example before we go.
You're trying to force me to overstate my case. I'm not overstating it. I'm just saying there is an element of EU resources and activity that's targeted at schools, that's designed to show the EU in a positive light, and I don't feel the other side of the story is shown in schools to the same extent.
We are members of the European Union.
Richard, thank you very much.
That's a clip from an appearance I made on The Big Questions on BBC One on a Sunday morning. It was at the stage where I was pretty fed up with UKIP. I hadn't actually quite decided to leave though, and I certainly hadn't decided to go public with my concerns at that point. But I'd thought in my mind lots of times, I just imagined if ever I had the opportunity to challenge David Coburn on TV, for example, about the Operation Trashmina business and put him on the spot and accuse him of lying about it. I thought that's exactly what he deserved. So I'd imagined that in my head, so idly dreaming, if you like. So I turned up with The Big Questions in their waiting room. Then along came David Coburn. Okay, didn't know he was going to be on the show that day. Okay, fair enough. Then just before we were due to go through for the programme, also walked in Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh. And the thought crossed my mind, I could go to Tasmina, I could say to her, look, if you bring up the mispronouncing of your name, I'll back you up and I'll publicly sort of humiliate David Coburn by saying that I've heard his right-hand man bragging about it. And we'll really put him on the spot. And I had to make a split-second decision. Was I going to do this or wasn't I? And I didn't. But I should have done. It was the ideal opportunity. He'd been delivered into my hands. And that would have been a fantastic opportunity to really put David Coburn on the spot, to say the very least. But anyway, you live and learn. So UKIP is not a party of social conservatism. It's not a party promoting family values. It's not pro-marriage. It's not pro-life. I mean, it's not clear about gender and sexuality, these sort of issues in education, for example. Looking at what's happened since then in UKIP, it's been absolute chaos. Leaders coming and going. And looking at the leaders, certainly some of them are not upholders of the sanctity of marriage. We can certainly put it that way. I think UKIP's moved from being primarily anti-EU to being primarily anti-Islam. Now, I've certainly got some serious concerns about the influence of Islam, but there are other important issues as well. If we're going to save the foundations of our society, it's not just a matter of dealing with concerns about Islam. There are much wider issues that need to be addressed, and I think UKIP is not addressing them. We just had the local election results yesterday. UKIP's been as good as wiped out in the English Council elections, and that's continuing a trend. So back to my situation. I joined UKIP because I thought it was the only party that would have me, and it wouldn't. Even if it would have me, having seen what it was like on the inside, I wouldn't want to be part of it. A last option, some people might say, the Scottish Christian Party. No, I was never going to join that. Politics is not about going under the banner of a religious faith. It's about a set of ideas, a set of principles, and gathering people who agree with those. So the Scottish Christian Party wasn't an option for me. I also think calling yourself the Scottish Christian Party, you limit your support too much to just Christians, whether there's a huge section of the population that might agree with some of the principles on some contemporary issues. But I'll save that for another video. So what you do when you want to get involved in politics, you really are keen for your voice to be heard. You think there's a vital element missing in Scottish politics, but none of the parties are going to give you the opportunity to represent those values. Well, you start your own party. So I gathered a small team of people, and together we launched the Scottish Family Party, and that's how the Scottish Family Party was born. But I hope you found that interesting. Do subscribe to us on YouTube. Have a look at our Facebook page. Have a look at our website. Obviously, we're a political party. You could join us on the website. But thanks for watching.